I stand before you today with a declaration that is not polite, not negotiable, and not temporary. It is a declaration that does not ask for permission from fear, does not consult doubt, and does not bow to circumstances. It is a decision. And once a human being makes a true decision, something shifts in the atmosphere of their life. I will do it or I will die. Now listen carefully, because this is not about physical death. This is about the death of excuses. This is about the burial of procrastination. This is about the end of a life that settles for less than what it was designed to become. Too many people are walking around alive biologically, but dead purposefully. Their heart is beating, but their dream is buried. Their lungs are breathing, but their vision has suffocated under the weight of fear, opinions, and delay. But something happens when a person draws a line within themselves and says, no more. Not next year. Not when conditions improve. Not when people support me. Now, I will do it or I will die. Because when your why becomes stronger than your comfort, you stop negotiating with mediocrity. You stop asking, what if I fail? And you begin asking, what if I never try? You stop waiting for motivation and you start operating from conviction. And conviction is dangerous in the best way possible. Conviction wakes you up when you're tired. Conviction keeps you moving when there is no applause. Conviction pushes you forward when logic says stop and fear says quit. Because when you are convinced about something, you don't need external energy. You become your own fuel. Let me tell you something that most people will never admit. The greatest tragedy in life is not failure. It is never discovering what you were capable of because you were too afraid to commit fully. Half-hearted effort produces half-lived lives. You cannot step into greatness with hesitation. You cannot fulfill purpose with divided loyalty between comfort and calling. You cannot become extraordinary while protecting your convenience. There comes a moment when you must choose safety or significance. And those who choose significance understand something very powerful. They understand that pressure is not their enemy. It is their training ground. You see, diamonds are not formed in comfort. Strength is not built in ease. Vision is not developed in distraction. Everything that is valuable is forged under pressure. So when challenges come, when opposition rises, when doors close and people doubt you, you don't interpret that as a sign to quit. You interpret that as confirmation that you are on a path that matters. Because meaningless pursuits rarely meet resistance. It is the things that matter that are tested. And testing is not punishment, it is preparation. But preparation requires something most people are unwilling to give: total commitment, not interest, not curiosity, not temporary enthusiasm. Commitment. Commitment says, I will show up whether I feel like it or not. Commitment says, I will continue whether I see results or not. Commitment says, I will finish what I started regardless of how difficult it becomes. And here is the truth. Your future does not respond to what you occasionally do. It responds to what you consistently commit to. Consistency is the language of transformation, not intensity for a day, not excitement for a week, not motivation for a season. Consistency. The person who decides, I will do it or die, is not saying, I will never feel fear. They are saying, fear will not have authority over my decisions. Because courage is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to submit to it. And let me speak directly to the fear that is sitting quietly in some of you right now. The fear of failing. The fear of being judged. The fear of starting and not finishing. The fear of stepping out and being seen. Listen carefully, fear is a storyteller. And most of the stories it tells you are lies about a future that hasn't happened. Fear says, you're not ready, but growth only happens when you move before you feel ready. Fear says, what if you fail? But failure is not your enemy, it is your teacher. Fear says, what will people say? But the same people you are afraid of disappointing are often too busy dealing with their own lives to sustain their attention on yours. And even if they do talk, let them. Because those who spend their time talking rarely spend their time building. You must decide whose voice has authority in your life. Because you cannot follow your purpose and follow the crowd at the same time. At some point, you must become comfortable with being misunderstood. Because vision is always clear to the one who carries it, and often invisible to those who don't. And if you wait for everyone to understand your path, you will never begin walking it. Let me tell you something powerful. Everything you are meant to become already exists within you in seed form. You are not trying to become something foreign. You are trying to manifest something internal. Your assignment is not outside of you. It is inside of you, waiting for expression. But seeds do not grow in comfort. Seeds grow when they are buried in discipline, buried in sacrifice, buried in persistence. And here is what most people misunderstand about sacrifice. Sacrifice is not loss, it is investment. You are not losing time when you work on your dream. You are investing in your future. You are not losing comfort when you stretch yourself. You are expanding your capacity. You are not losing opportunities when you say no to distractions. You are protecting your purpose. Every no you say to what does not matter is a yes to what does. But you must be clear about what matters. Because if you don't define your priorities, your environment will define them for you. And your environment does not always have your destiny in mind. There are voices around you that will encourage you to stay small. There are systems around you that reward average thinking. There are patterns around you that normalize procrastination. And if you are not intentional, you will become a product of your surroundings instead of a creator of your future. But the person who says, I will do it or die, breaks patterns. They refuse to inherit limitations. They refuse to accept ceilings placed on them by others. They understand that where they started does not determine where they must finish. And they take responsibility, not partial responsibility, total responsibility. Because responsibility is power. The moment you blame others, you surrender control. The moment you make excuses, you weaken your influence. The moment you wait for someone else to fix your situation. You delay your own progress. But when you say, "It is on me," everything changes, because now you are no longer waiting. You are acting. You are no longer reacting. You are creating. You are no longer surviving. You are building. And builders think differently. Builders don't ask, "Is this easy?" They ask, "Is this necessary?" Builders don't ask, "How long will it take?" They ask, "What does it require?" Builders don't quit when it gets hard. They adjust, they learn, they grow, and they continue. Because they understand something very important. Progress is not always visible. There will be seasons where you feel like nothing is happening. No recognition, no applause, no immediate results. But beneath the surface, something is forming. Discipline is forming. Capacity is forming. And when the time is right, what was invisible will become undeniable. But only if you don't quit. Because quitting interrupts the process. Quitting resets the progress. Quitting convinces you that you were never capable, when in reality you were just not consistent long enough to see the result. Listen carefully. You are closer than you think. Most people quit in the season right before breakthrough. They endure the preparation, but abandon the manifestation. They survive the training, but forfeit the reward. And all because they did not have the mindset that says, "I will do it or die." Because that mindset eliminates alternatives. It removes the escape route. It closes the back door. And when there is no back door, you become creative with the front door. You find solutions you never would have considered. You push beyond limits you never would have challenged. You discover strength you never knew you had. Because human potential expands under pressure when there is no option to retreat. Let me say this clearly. You are stronger than your excuses. You are more capable than your past suggests. You are more equipped than your doubts admit. But none of that matters unless you act. Potential without action is wasted possibility. Vision without execution is hallucination. Desire without discipline is frustration. You must move, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncertain. Movement creates momentum, and momentum changes everything. Because once you begin, something shifts, clarity increases, confidence grows, opportunities appear. Not because the world suddenly became easier, but because you became active. And action attracts results, not perfect action, consistent action. Not flawless execution, persistent execution. And as you move, you refine. You learn what works and what doesn't. You adjust your strategy. You improve your approach. You evolve. And that is the goal, not perfection, but progression. Because perfection is an illusion that keeps people stuck. They wait for the perfect time, the perfect plan, the perfect conditions. And while they wait, life moves on. But the person who says, "I will do it or die," does not wait for perfect. They work with present. They take what they have, where they are, and they begin. Because beginning is powerful. Beginning disrupts stagnation. Beginning breaks fear. Beginning activates possibility. And once you begin, you must continue, because consistency builds identity. You don't become confident by thinking about confidence. You become confident by doing what requires courage repeatedly. You don't become disciplined by wishing for discipline. You become disciplined by honoring your commitments daily. You don't become successful by hoping for success. You become successful by aligning your habits with your goals consistently. Your habits are the architecture of your future. And if your habits do not support your vision will remain unrealized. So you must evaluate your life honestly. What are you doing daily? What are you prioritizing consistently? What are you tolerating repeatedly? Because what you tolerate, you empower. And what you empower, you experience. If you tolerate laziness, you will experience stagnation. If you tolerate distraction, you will experience delay. If you tolerate fear, you will experience limitation. But if you discipline your actions, you will experience growth. If you focus your energy, you will experience progress. If you commit fully, you will experience transformation. And transformation is not an event, it is a process. A process that requires patience. A process that requires endurance. A process that requires faith, not blind faith, but active faith. The kind of faith that works. The kind of faith that moves. The kind of faith that persists even when results are not immediate. Because true belief is not proven by what you say. It is proven by what you continue to do when there is no evidence yet. And that is where most people struggle. They want proof before commitment. But the reality is, commitment creates proof. You don't wait to see the result to believe. You believe enough to continue until the result appears. And that is why this declaration is so powerful. I will do it or I will die. Because it removes doubt. It silences hesitation. It demands action. It forces alignment between your words and your behavior. And when your life aligns with your declaration, something unstoppable begins to form, not overnight, not instantly, but inevitably. Because sustained effort produces inevitable results. You cannot consistently apply the right actions and remain the same. Change is guaranteed when effort is consistent. Growth is guaranteed when commitment is real. Success is guaranteed when you refuse to quit. So the question is not whether it is possible. The question is whether you are willing. Willing to sacrifice comfort. Willing to endure discomfort. Willing to stay consistent when it's not exciting. Willing to keep going when it's not convenient. Willing to stand alone if necessary. Because the road to purpose is not crowded. Many start, few continue, even fewer finish. But those who finish are not the most talented. They are not the most privileged. They are not the most fortunate. They are the most committed. They are the ones who decided that quitting was not an option. They are the ones who declared, I will do it or die. So today, you have a choice. You can continue negotiating with your potential. You can continue postponing your purpose. You can continue living beneath what you are capable of. Or you can decide, not wish, not hope, not consider, decide. And once you decide, align your life with that decision. Change your habits. Change your focus. Change your standards, because a decision without alignment is just a wish. But a decision with alignment becomes a force. And when you become that force, obstacles don't stop you, they shape you. Delays don't defeat you, they develop you. Challenges don't break you, they build you. Until one day, what seemed impossible becomes reality, not because it was easy, but because you refused to quit. Because you committed fully. Because you decided that you would not live and die with potential unexpressed. So I leave you with this. There is something inside you that the world needs. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. And it will not manifest itself. It requires your action, your discipline, your commitment. So rise with that conviction, walk with that determination, work with that intensity, and live with that declaration echoing in your spirit every single day. I will do it or I will die. Identity is shaped by what you refuse to quit, not by what you start, not by what you talk about, not by what you intend to become, but by what you hold on to when everything in you wants to let go. Identity is not built in moments of excitement. It is forged in moments of resistance. It is revealed when pressure rises, when results delay, when the path becomes unclear and the voice in your mind begins to whisper, "This is too much." Because anyone can begin. Anyone can feel inspired. Anyone can make a declaration when the energy is high and the vision feels fresh. But identity is not proven at the beginning. It is proven in the middle. In the quiet, uncelebrated, often uncomfortable middle, where nothing seems to be changing, yet everything is being formed. And in that space, the question is never, can you start? The question is always, what will you refuse to quit? Because what you refuse to quit becomes your standard. And your standard becomes your identity. If you refuse to quit when it gets difficult, you become resilient. If you refuse to quit when it gets boring, you become disciplined. If you refuse to quit when it gets lonely, you become focused. If you refuse to quit when it gets uncertain, you become strong. Identity is not something you announce. It is something you demonstrate repeatedly. You don't wake up one day and become a person of excellence. You build that identity every time you choose not to settle for less. You don't suddenly become a person of discipline. You construct that identity every time you follow through on what you said you would do, even when you don't feel like it, because feelings are unstable. They change with circumstances, with moods, with moments. But identity is stable. Identity is anchored in decisions that are reinforced through action. And here is where most people misunderstand themselves. They think identity is something they discover, when in reality, identity is something they construct. You are not waiting to find out who you are. You are actively becoming who you are through what you repeatedly choose. Every decision is a vote. Every action is a vote. Every time you continue instead of quitting, you are casting a vote for the person you are becoming. And over time, those votes accumulate until they form a clear identity. Not a fragile one that depends on motivation. Not a temporary one that fades under pressure. But a solid, undeniable identity that does not negotiate with difficulty. Because when identity is established, behavior follows automatically. You don't have to convince a disciplined person to act with discipline. That is who they are. You don't have to push a committed person to stay consistent. That is how they operate. You don't have to remind a focused person to eliminate distractions. That is their standard. And that is why this principle matters so deeply. If you want to change your life, you must change what you refuse to quit. Because quitting is not just an action, it is a pattern. And patterns create identity. If you quit when things get hard, you build an identity of avoidance. If you quit when results are slow, you build an identity of impatience. If you quit when people doubt you, you build an identity that is controlled by external voices. And once that identity is formed, it becomes self-reinforcing. You begin to expect less from yourself. You begin to justify inconsistency. You begin to lower your standards to match your behavior. And slowly, without realizing it, you adapt to a version of yourself that you were never meant to become. But the opposite is also true. When you refuse to quit, even when it's difficult, something begins to shift internally. At first, it feels forced. It feels unnatural. It feels uncomfortable. But over time, it becomes familiar. Then it becomes normal. Then it becomes who you are. Because identity is built through repetition under pressure. Let me make this clear. The moments you feel like quitting are not interruptions. They are invitations. Invitations to define yourself. Invitations to choose who you are going to be. Invitations to separate intention from identity. Because it is easy to say, I am committed. But commitment is not proven by words. It is proven by endurance. It is proven when the excitement fades. It is proven when the progress slows. It is proven when the reward is not immediate. And in those moments, you are not just working toward a goal, you are working on yourself. You are shaping your character. You are strengthening your mindset. You are reinforcing an identity that will carry you beyond this single pursuit into every area of your life. Because identity does not stay confined to one space, it expands. The discipline you build in one area influences every other area. The consistency you develop in one pursuit begins to appear in everything you touch. The resilience you cultivate in one challenge becomes your default response to all challenges. That is the power of identity. It multiplies, but only if it is built intentionally. And intentional identity requires conscious refusal. Refusal to quit. Refusal to settle. Refusal to compromise on what you know you are capable of becoming. Because there will always be reasons to stop. Valid reasons, convincing reasons, logical reasons. But if you allow every reason to dictate your behavior, you will never build anything significant. Because significance requires stability. And stability comes from identity, not from circumstances, not from external validation, not from temporary motivation, but from an internal decision that says, this is who I am, regardless of how I feel, regardless of what is happening, regardless of how long it takes. And once that decision is made, quitting is no longer an option to consider. It becomes a contradiction to who you are, because you cannot be someone who refuses to quit and still choose to walk away when it becomes uncomfortable. That tension forces growth. That tension demands alignment. And that alignment produces results. But understand this, the process of building identity is not glamorous. It is repetitive. It is demanding. It is often invisible. You will not always receive recognition for it. You will not always feel progress. You will not always see immediate outcomes. But what is happening internally is far more valuable than what is visible externally. Because once identity is formed, results become inevitable. Not instant, but inevitable. Because your actions begin to align consistently with your standards. And consistency is what produces outcomes. Not occasional effort, not bursts of motivation, but sustained, disciplined, repeated action. And that only happens when your identity supports it. So the question becomes, what are you reinforcing daily? What are you refusing to quit on? Because whatever that is, it is shaping you. If you refuse to quit on your excuses, you are reinforcing limitation. If you refuse to quit on distractions, you are reinforcing inconsistency. If you refuse to quit on comfort, you are reinforcing stagnation. But if you refuse to quit on your growth, everything changes. Because growth requires discomfort. Growth requires effort. Growth requires patience. And those are the exact things most people abandon too early. Not because they are incapable, but because they have not yet built the identity that sustains them through it. And that is why you must become intentional about what you endure. Because endurance is not passive, it is active. It is a decision to continue despite resistance. It is a commitment to remain engaged despite difficulty. It is a refusal to disconnect from the process, even when the outcome is not yet visible. And every time you endure, you strengthen your identity. You teach yourself something powerful. I am not someone who stops when it gets hard. And that belief becomes a foundation that supports greater risks, greater challenges, greater responsibilities, because you trust yourself, not because everything always works out, but because you know you will not quit. And self-trust is one of the most powerful assets you can develop. Because when you trust yourself, you move differently. You take action without constant hesitation. You commit without needing guarantees. You persist without needing constant reassurance. Because your confidence is no longer based on outcomes. It is based on identity, on who you know yourself to be. And when identity is strong, external circumstances lose their ability to control your behavior. Failure does not stop you. Delay does not discourage you. Criticism does not define you, because your standard is internal, and internal standards are not easily shaken, but they must be built deliberately, consistently, through choices that align with who you are becoming, not who you feel like being in the moment. And that requires discipline. Not the kind of discipline that is forced temporarily, but the kind that is integrated into your identity, where you don't have to convince yourself every day You simply act in alignment with who you are. And that is where freedom is found. Not in doing whatever you feel, but in becoming someone who does what is necessary. Because necessity is what produces results, and results reinforce identity. It becomes a cycle. You act consistently. You see progress. That progress strengthens your identity. That identity fuels more consistent action. And over time, what once felt difficult becomes natural. What once required effort becomes automatic. What once felt impossible becomes expected. Because you have become the kind of person who does not quit. And that identity will carry you further than talent ever could. Because talent without consistency is unreliable. Talent without discipline is wasted. Talent without commitment is limited. But identity sustains. Identity stabilizes. Identity multiplies potential into performance. And that is why two people with the same ability can produce completely different results. Because one quits when it gets hard and the other refuses to. And that single difference compounds over time into completely different lives. Because quitting resets progress, but persistence compounds it, and identity determines which one you choose. So every day, whether you realize it or not, you are shaping your identity through what you continue, through what you tolerate, through what you refuse to quit. And if you are not intentional, you will build an identity by default instead of by design. But you have the power to choose, to decide what kind of person you are going to be. Not in words, but in actions. Not occasionally, but consistently. Not when it is easy, but especially when it is difficult. Because difficulty is the testing ground of identity. It reveals what is real. It exposes what is weak. It strengthens what is committed. And it gives you the opportunity to reinforce who you are becoming. So when you feel like quitting, understand what that moment represents. It is not just about the task in front of you. It is about your identity. It is about who you are choosing to be. And in that moment, you have a decision to make. Not just about whether you continue, but about who you become.